Hey y'all, welcome back to my YouTube channel, The Mind of Jules. I know my background and my setup is looking a lot different from what you all have seen on this channel so far. This video is nothing like I've ever done on this channel so far. So, I thought to myself, this channel, as it is Mind of Jules, it's always been a very intellectual, woke, or whatever type of channel you want to call it, exposing the truth, rejoicing in knowledge and conversations. So I'm just like, I be reading, and it's just like, what type of channel is this if we don't dive into some literature together, because I genuinely love to do that, and I don't have anyone to do that with right now. So I'm like, let me just, you know, read with you guys. And I know some people enjoy this type of content, especially if they're reading the same book as me, or if you just, you haven't had anyone read to you in a long time. So I'm not really going to waste too much of your time. The book that I've been reading for a really long time, we're not going to talk about that. It's called Women Who Run with the Wolves. Women Who Run with the Wolves. That's the name of the book. So look it up. Maybe join me if you want, or you could just, listen to these. You can just listen to these videos of me reading the book. Like, I love this book so much, and I talk about it. And I just want to kind of bring y'all in to how amazing this writer, let me see, because I don't want to get her name wrong. So, let's see. By Clarissa Pinkola Estes, PhD. So, Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, like, such a great writer. So, right now I am on chapter 9. This is yeah, I'm on the ebook. I would like the physical copy, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do, okay? I've been reading this book for a minute now, so physical media, we gotta, don't throw away your physical media. We still need that. Okay, so I'm on chapter 9, called Homing, Returning to Oneself. Okay. Now, I did want to preface this by, if you have not started this book or heard about it, it's definitely about how women are a lot like wolves, and just diving deep into the psyche of the feminine. So, we're just going to get into it. Chapter 9, the story that I'm actually on the 4th story of chapter 9. Yeah, this was kind of like an impulsive thought. I'm like, why don't I just read this, like record it and read? Like, I love doing this. So, it's called The Lonely Man. Okay? The Lonely Man. In a story similar to the core of this one, it is actually a human woman who lures a whale man to copulate with her by stealing his fin. In other stories, the offspring is sometimes a girl, sometimes a fish boy, sometimes the old one out in the sea is a venerable old female. Because there is so much gender exchange in stories, the maleness and femaleness of the characters in the story are far less important than the proscribed process. In this spirit, let us consider that the lonely man who steals the sealskin represents the ego of a woman's psyche. The health of the ego is often determined by how well one measures boundaries in the outer world, how strongly one's identity is formed, how well one differentiates past, present, and future, and how closely one's perceptions coincide with consensual reality. It is a timeless motif in human psyche that the ego and the soul vie to control the life force. In early life, the ego, with its appetites, often leads. It is always cooking something up that smells really good. The ego is very muscular during this time. It relegates the soul to back porch kitchen duty. But at some point, sometimes in our 20s, sometimes in our 30s, most often in our 40s, Although some women aren't really ready until they're 50 or 60 or even in their 70s or 80s, we begin to at last let the soul lead. The power shifts away from bric-a-brac and frick-frack to soulfulness. And though the soul does not assume the lead by killing off the ego is demoted, one might say, and given a different assignment in the psyche, which is essentially to submit to the concerns of the soul. From the time we are born, there is a wildish urge within us that desires our souls lead our lives, for the ego can only understand just so much. Imagine the ego on a permanent and relatively short leash. It can only go so far into the mysteries of life and spirit. Usually it becomes frightened. It has a bad habit of reducing all numinosity to a nothing but numinosity. So it's saying the ego, this is me by the way, it's saying the ego has a bad habit of reducing all numinosity to a nothing but. And so, I just really like to record this because, I learned so many new words reading. So reducing all numinosity to a nothing but numinosity. So numinous. Numinous means arousing spiritual or religious emotion, mysterious or awe-inspiring, also supernatural. So basically having a strong religious or spiritual quality. So the ego has a bad habit of reducing all numinosity to a nothing but. It demands facts that are observable. Proofs that are of a feeling or mystical nature do not very often sit well with the ego. That is why the ego is lonely. It is very limited in its constructs in this way. It cannot fully participate in the more mysterious processes of soul and psyche. Yet the lonely man yearns for soul, dimly recognizes soulful and wildish things when they are near. Wow, okay. So it says, yet the lonely man yearns for soul. I think sometimes in these ebooks, I'm not gonna lie, sometimes in these ebooks I have noticed like a couple typos. I don't know what that's about, but I think this is saying, yet the lonely man who yearns for soul dimly recognizes soulful and wildish things when they are near. Some people use the words soul and spirit interchangeably, but in fairy tales, the soul is always the progenitor. Progenitor. I don't know how to even say that word, y'all. That's how you know. Gynitor. And the progenitor. So I see. So Gynitor versus Genitor. Like, how are we even supposed to say that? And so this is where I go to look it up. Genitor. So, but in fairy tales, the soul is always the progenitor and the progenitor of spirit. So I wonder what they mean by that. Are these real words? Progenitor. In genealogy, the progenitor is the sometimes legendary founder of a family, line of descent, clan or tribe, noble house or ethnic group. So pretty much the legendary member of a family. So it's also a person or thing from which a person, animal, or plant is descended or originates. So an ancestor or parent. So progenitor. Now, progenitor, what do they mean by that? Because there's a hyphen in that as if it's not like a real word. So, we're just going to continue reading and use our context clues, okay? So, some people use the words soul and spirit interchangeably, but in fairy tales, the soul is always the progenitor and the progenitor of spirit. So, saying that the spirit basically, that the soul comes from spirit. So, that's basically what it's saying. In arcane hermeneutics, what? All these new in arcane, 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 understood by few, mysterious or secret. That's what that means. Arcane, understood by few, mysterious or secret. And then hermeneutics, let's look up this word. Hermeneutics is the theory and methodology of interpretation, especially the interpretation of biblical texts, wisdom literature, and philosophical texts. So basically, the branch of knowledge that deals with interpretation, especially of the Bible or literary texts. Okay. So in arcane humanetics, the spirit is a being born of the soul, like I just said. The spirit inherits or incarnates into matter in order to gather news of the ways of the world and carries these back to the soul. When not interfered with, the relationship between soul and spirit is one of perfect symmetry. Each enriches the other in return. Together, the soul and spirit form an ecology, as in a pond where the creatures at the bottom nourish those at the top, and those at the top nourish those at the bottom. In Jungian psychology, the ego is often described as a small island of consciousness that floats in a sea of unconsciousness. However, in folklore, the ego is portrayed as a creature of appetite, often symbolized by a not very bright human or animal surrounded by forces very mystifying to it and over which it attempts to gain control. Sometimes the ego is able to gain control in a most brutish and destructive manner, but in the end, through the heroine's or hero's progress, it most often loses its bid to reign. At the beginning of one's life, the ego is curious about the soul world, but more often it is concerned with fulfilling its own hungers. The ego is initially born into us as potential and is shaped, developed, and filled up with ideas, values, and duties by the world around us, our parents, our teachers, our culture. And this is as it should be, for it becomes our escort, our armor, and our scout in the outer world. However, if the wildish nature is not allowed to emanate upward through the ego, giving it color, juice, and instinctive responsiveness, then although the culture may approve of what has been fashioned in this ego, the soul does not, cannot, will not approve such incompleteness of its work. The lonely man in the tale is attempting to participate in the life of the soul. But like the ego, he is not particularly built for it and tries to grab at the soul rather than develop a relationship with it. Why does the ego steal the sealskin? Like all other lonely or hungry things, it loves the light. It sees the light and the possibility of being close to the soul, and it creeps up to it and steals one of its essential camouflages. Ego cannot help itself. It is what it is, attracted to the light. Even though it cannot live under the water, it has its own yearning for relationship with the soul. The ego is crude in comparison to the soul. Its way of doing things is usually not evocative or sensitive, but it has a tiny and dimly understood longing for the beautiful light. And this, in some way and for some time, calms the ego. So in a hunger for the soul, our own ego self steals the pelt. If you all don't know what a pelt was, I didn't know what a pelt was, so I had to look up the word. A pelt is basically like a fur, like a hide, like animal hide or whatever. So in a hunger for soul, our own ego self steals the pelt. Stay with me, whispers the ego. I will make you happy by isolating you from your soul self and your cycles of returning to your soul home. I will make you very, very happy. Please, please stay. And so, as is right in the beginning of feminine individuation, the soul is pressured into relationship with ego. The mundane functions of the soul's subservience to the ego occurs in order for us to learn the world, the ways to gain things, how to work, how to differentiate good from not so good, when to move, when to stay put, how to live with other people, learning the mechanics and machinations of culture, holding a job, holding a baby, taking care of the body, taking care of business, all the things of the outer life. The initial purpose of developing such an important construct within a woman's psyche, the marriage of the seal woman and the lonely man, a marriage in which she is definitely subservient, is to create a temporary arrangement that will ultimately produce a spirit child who can cohabit and translate in and between both the mundane and wildish worlds. Once this symbolic child is born, developed, initiated, it resurfaces into the outer world, and the relationship with soul is healed. Even though the lonely man, the ego, cannot dominate forever, for someday it must submit to the demands of soul for the rest of a woman's life by living with the seal woman slash soul woman. It has been touched by greatness and is therefore gratified, enriched, and humbled, all at the same time. Okay? So now this next heading says the spirit child. So we see that the union of opposites between ego and soul produces something of infinite value, the spirit child. Okay? So we see that the union of opposites between ego and soul produces something of infinite value, the spirit child. And it is true that even when the ego roughly intrudes upon the more subtle aspects of psyche and soul, a cross-fertilization is taking place. Paradoxically, by stealing the soul's protection and its ability to vanish into the water at will, the ego participates in making a child who will claim dual heritage, world and soul, one who will be able to carry messages and gifts back and forth between the two. And some of the greatest tales, such as the Gaelic Beauty and the Beast, the Mexican Bruja Milagra, and the Japanese Tsukino Waguma, the bear, finding the way back to one's rightful psychic order begins with the feeding of or the caring for a lonely and or injured woman, man, or beast. That such a child who will have the ability to traverse two very different worlds can come from a woman who is in such a skinless state and married to something in herself or in the outer world that is so lonely and undeveloped is one of the constant miracles of the psyche. Something occurs within us when we are in such a state, something that produces a feeling state, a tiny new life, a small flame that thrives under imperfect, arduous, or even inhumane conditions. Now, I've heard the word arduous before, but I just want to look it up because I have never used the word. Arduous, involving or requiring strenuous effort, difficult or tiring. So it does sound exactly, it means how it sounds, okay? So the spirit child is La Niña Milagrosa, a miracle child who has the ability to hear the call, hear the far-off voice that says, it is time to come back to oneself. The child is a part of our medial nature that compels us, for it can hear the call when it comes. It is the child rising out of sleep, out of bed, out of the house, and out into the wind-filled night and down to the wild sea that causes us to assert, as God is my witness, I shall proceed in this way, or I will endure, or I shall not be turned away, or I shall find a way to continue. It is the child who brings the sealskin, soul skin back to his mother. It is the child who enables her to return to her home. This child is the spiritual power that impels us to continue our important work, to push back, change our lives, better the community, join in helping to balance the world, all by returning to home. If one wants to participate in these things, the difficult marriage between soul and ego must be made. The spirit child must be brought to life. Retrieval and return are the goals of mastery. Regardless of a woman's circumstances, the spirit child, the old seal who rises up from the sea calling his daughter home, and the open sea are always near. Always. Even in places and at times one might least expect them to be present. Since 1971, I've taught writing as a contemplative practice in prisons and penitentiaries across the nation. On a particular trip to a federal women's prison with a group of artists/healers, in order to do performance and teach a group of 100 women who were intensely involved in a spiritual growth program there, as usual, I saw few hardened women. Instead, I saw dozens of women in various stages of seal womanness. Many had been figuratively, but also literally, captured through their intensely naive choices. Whatever their reasons for being there, in spite of the most constrained conditions, each woman in her own way was clearly in the process of creating a spirit child, carefully and painfully fashioned from her own flesh, from her own bones. Each woman was searching also for the sealskin. Each was in the process of remembering the way back to the soul home. One artist of our troupe, a young black violinist named India Cook, played for the women. We were outdoors in the open yard. It was very cold, and the wind was making a ooh sound, and the backdrop on the sound around the backdrop on the open stage. The violinist drew her bow across the strings of her electrified violin and played sternum-piercing music in a minor key. Truly, her violin wept. A big Lakota woman pounded on my arm and hoarsely whispered, "This sound, that violin unlocks a place in me. I thought I was locked up good and tight and forever." Her broad face was both puzzled and ethereal. My heart broke on itself, but in a good way, for I saw that no matter what had happened to her, and much had happened to her, she could still hear the cry from over the sea, that call from home. In the Sealskin Soulskin story, the seal maiden tells her child stories about what lives and thrives under the sea. She instructs through her stories, shaping this child who was born of her union with the ego. She is forming the child, teaching it the terrain and the ways of the other. The soul is preparing this wildish child of the psyche for something very important. Drying out and crippling is the next heading. Drying out and crippling. Most of women's depression, ennui, and wandering confusions are caused by a severely restricted soul life in which innovation, impulse, and creation are restricted or forbidden. So I want to look up that word ennui, ENNUIS. Search the web. Let's see. Ennui. How do we say that? Is it even English? It's a French word. A feeling that combines tiredness and boredom. Okay, so I'm probably saying it wrong as hell. Ennui. Yeah, I'm probably saying it wrong as hell. I don't know, but you know, if you read and learn words, yes, I be saying words wrong as hell, but I know the word. I just don't know how to say it. But a feeling that combines tiredness and boredom. So most of a woman's depressions, ennuis, and wandering confusions are caused by a severely restricted soul life in which innovation, impulse, and creation are restricted or forbidden. Women receive enormous impulse to act from the creative force. We cannot overlook the fact that there is still much thieving and hamstringing of women's talents through cultural restriction and punishment of her natural and wildish instincts. We can break away from this condition if there is an underground river or even a little freshet pouring from somewhere soulful into our lives. But if a woman, far from home, surrenders all power, she will become first a fog, then a vapor, and finally a wisp of her former wildish self. All this secreting away of a woman's natural pelt and her subsequent drying out and crippling reminds me of an old story that circulated in our family among the several old country tales. My late Uncle Vilmos once told it to calm and teach an angry adult in our extended family, one who was being too harsh with the child. Uncle Vilmos had infinite patience and tenderness toward humans and creatures. He was a natural storyteller in the Mesomondic tradition and skilled in applying stories as gentle medicine. Wow. And it goes into this next story. Okay. A man came to Zabo Taylor and tried on a suit. As he stood before the mirror, he noticed the vest was a little uneven at the bottom. "Oh," said the tailor, "don't worry about that. Just hold the shorter end down with your left hand and no one will ever notice." While the customer proceeded to do this, he noticed that the lapel of the jacket curled up instead of laying flat. "Oh, that?" said the tailor. "That's nothing. Just turn your head a little and hold it down with your chin." The customer complied, and as he did, he noticed that the inseam of the pants was a little short, and he felt that the rise was a bit too high. "Oh, don't worry about that," said the tailor. "Just pull the inseam down with your right hand and everything will be perfect." The customer agreed and purchased the suit. The next day he wore his new suit with all the accompanying hand and chin alterations. As he limped through the park with his chin holding down his lapel, one hand tugging at the vest, the other hand grasping his crotch, two old men stopped playing checkers to watch him stagger by. "Missing, oh God," said the first man. "Look at that poor crippled man." The second man reflected for a moment, then murmured, "Egan, yes, the crippling is too bad, but I wonder, where did he get such a nice suit?" The reaction of the last old man constitutes a common cultural response toward a woman who has developed an impeccable persona, but who is all crippled up with trying to maintain it. "Well, yes, she is crippled, but look at how nice she looks. Look at how good she is. Look at how well she's doing." When we become dried out, we try to walk all crippled up in order to make it appear that we are handling everything, that all is well and just so. Whether it is the soul skin that is missing, or the culture-made skin that doesn't fit, we are crippled by pretending it is otherwise. But when we do this, life is diminished and the cost to ourselves is very high. When a woman begins to dry out, it becomes harder and harder for her to function in the hardy, wildish nature. Ideas, creativity, life itself thrives on moisture. Women in this condition often have dark man dreams. Thugs, prowlers, or rapists threaten them, hold them hostage, steal from them, and far worse. Sometimes these dreams are trauma dreams arising from an actual assault. But most often they are dreams of women who are drying out, who are not giving care to the instinctual side of their lives, who steal from themselves, deprive the creative function, and sometimes make no effort to help themselves, or else work very hard to ignore the call back to the water. Over the years of my practice, I have seen many women in this dried out state, some mildly affected, others more so. Concomitantly, I have heard from the same women many injured animal dreams. These increasing dramatically in women and men over the last 10 years or so. It is hard not to notice that the increase in injured animal dreams coincides with the devastations to the wilderness both within us as well as outside of people. In these dreams, the creature, doe, lizard, horse, bear, bull, whale, and so on, is crippled up, much like the man in the Taylor story, much like the seal woman. Although dreams of injured animals comment on the condition of a woman's instinctive psyche and her relationship to the wild nature, at the same time these dreams are also reflect deep lacerations in the collective unconscious regarding the loss of instinctual life. If the culture prohibits an integral insane life for women for whatever reason, she will dream injured animal dreams. Though the psyche makes every effort to cleanse and strengthen itself regularly, every lash mark out there is recorded on the unconscious in here, so that a dreamer carries the effects of losing her personal ties with the wild woman and also the world's loss of relationship with this deep nature. So sometimes it is not only the woman who is drying out. Sometimes essential aspects of one's microenvironment, the family or the workplace for instance, or one's larger culture, are caking and cracking to dust also, and these affect and afflict her. In order for her to contribute to helping aright these conditions, a return to her own skin, her own instinctual common sense, and her own return to home are necessary. As we have seen, it is hard to recognize our condition until we become like Seal Woman in her distress, peeling, limping, losing juice, and going blind. So it is a gift from the immense vitality of the psyche, then, that there is deep in the unconscious a caller, an old one, who rises to the surface of our consciousness and begins to incessantly call us back to our true natures. Okay, the next heading. Hearing the old one's call. What is that cry over the sea? This voice on the wind that calls the child from his bed and out into the night is similar to a kind of night dream that comes into a dreamer's awareness as a disembodied voice and nothing more. This is one of the most powerful dreams a dreamer can dream. In my cultural traditions, whatever is said by this voice in the dream is considered a direct transmission from the soul. Excuse me. It is said that disembodied voice dreams may occur at any time, but particularly when a soul is in distress. Then the deep self cuts to the chase, so to speak. Bang! A woman's soul speaks, and it tells her what comes next. In the story, the old seal rises out of its own element to begin the call. It is a profound feature of the wild psyche that if we do not come on our own, if we aren't paying attention to our own seasons and the time for return, the old one will come for us, calling and calling until something in us responds. Thank goodness for this natural homing signal that becomes louder and louder the more we are in need of return. The signal goes off as everything begins to be too, in either a negative or positive sense. It can be as much time to go home when there is too much positive stimulation as when there is ceaseless dissonance. Perhaps we have become too intense about something. We can be too worn down by something. We can be overloved, underloved, overworked, underworked. Each costs much. In the face of too much, we gradually become dry, our hearts become tired, our energies begin to become spare, and a mysterious longing for, we almost never have a name for it other than a something, rises up in us more and more. Then the old one calls. In this story, it is interesting that the one who hears and responds to the call from the sea is the little spirit child. It is he who ventures out over the ice crags and stones, who dumbly follows the cry, and who accidentally trips over his mother's rolled up sealskin. The child's restless sleep is an acute and accurate portrayal of the restlessness a woman feels when she is yearning to return to her psychic place of origin. Since the psyche is a complete system, all its elements resonate to the call. The woman's restlessness during this time is often accompanied by irritability and a sense that everything is much too near for comfort or far too far for peace. She feels anywhere from a little bit to a lot lost, for she has stayed too long from home. These feelings are just the right feelings to feel. They are a message that says, come here now. That feeling of being torn comes from hearing, consciously or unconsciously, something calling us back, something that we cannot say no to without hurting ourselves. If we don't go when it is time, the soul will come for us, as we see in these lines from a poem called Woman Who Lives Under the Lake. So here's the poem. ... One night, there's a heartbeat at the door. Outside, a woman in the fog, with hair of twigs and dress of weed, dripping green lake water. She says, I am you, and I have traveled a long distance. Come with me. There is something I must show you. She turns to go. Her cloak falls open. Suddenly, golden light everywhere. Golden light. ... Okay, so I'm assuming this is an excerpt from a much larger poem. Okay. The old seal rises up at night, and the child stumbles about at night. In this and many other tales, we see the main character discovering an astonishing truth or recovering an invaluable treasure while groping in the dark. This motif is ubiquitous Okay, let's make sure I'm using this word right, because I've definitely read and seen ubiquitous. Present, appearing, or found everywhere. So I guess obvious. Yeah, present, appearing, or found everywhere. Ubiquitous, ubiquitous. Okay, I guess that's how you say it. This motif is ubiquitous in fairy tales and occurs no matter what, by hook or by crook. Nothing makes the light, the wonder, the treasure stand out so well as darkness. The dark night of the soul has almost become a catchphrase in certain parts of the culture. The recovery of the divine is done in the dark of hell or Hades or there. The return of the Christo comes as a glow from the gloaming of hell. The Asian sun goddess Amaterasu bursts from the darkness beneath the mountain. The Sumerian goddess Inanna, in her water form, ignites into a white gold as she lies in a newly plowed trough of black earth. In the mountains in Chiapas, it is said that every day the yellow sun must burn a hole through the blackest Huipil blouse in order to rise up in the sky. Okay. The images of going about in and through the dark carry an age-old message that says, do not fear not knowing. In various phases and periods of our life, this is as it should be. This feature of tales and myths encourages us to follow the call, even when we've no idea of where to go, in what direction, or for how long. All we know is that, like the child in the tale, we must sit up, get up, and go see. So maybe we stumble around in the dark for a while trying to find what caused us, but because we have managed to not talk ourselves out of being summoned by the wild one, we invariably stumble over the soul skin. When we breathe up that soul state, we automatically enter the feeling state of, this is right, I know what I need. For many modern women, it is not the driving about in the dark looking for the soul skin that is most fearsome. Rather, it is the diving into the water, the actual return to home, and especially the actual leave taking that are far more formidable. Though women come back into themselves, draw on the skill set, padded clothes, and are all ready to go, it is hard to go. Really, really hard to cede, to hand over whatever we've been so busy with and just leave. Staying over long. All right, great job. Let's stop it there.